stop it. What do you think I am?
Underneath those flashy lights lies the dark side of Hollywood. You can't get to the top without making enemies, and these celebrities made many. They got their comeuppance. Here are 10 sensational revenge moments in Hollywood. Number 10. Joan Crawford snubs Bette Davis at the Oscars. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford's infamous feud has made its way into history as an iconic rivalry. The two starlets reportedly hated each other. They'd trash-talk one another in social circles, steal roles, and make snide comments. Still, Hollywood enjoyed seeing the two women go at it. Media houses capitalized off their mutual loathing. The press had dedicated sections for their animosity. All in all, the messy feud doubled as an entertaining saga in Hollywood. Joan supposedly buried the hatchet in 1962. That was when she begged Bette to star in the lead role on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It was the only movie the two ladies starred in together. It was also a box office success and earned them several Oscar nominations. However, Bette was the one who earned the nomination for Best Actress. And that's where this epic tale of revenge starts. You'll be shocked at what Joan did. Joan was seething. She hated that the Oscars had nominated Bette over her for Best Actress, so she campaigned against Bette. She also realized that a lot of nominees couldn't attend the event in 1963. That's when she planned her master revenge scheme. Joan approached every one of the nominees besides Bette. She asked them if they'd allow her to accept the award on their behalf. Anne Bancroft was filming in New York at the time and agreed. She was nominated for her role in The Miracle Worker. Joan knew that Anne was a strong contender, and she was right. Reportedly, Bette was okay with losing to Anne. However, she was blindsided when Joan walked on stage to accept her award. She was appalled and couldn't believe it. Joan had found a way to snub her at the Oscars after all. All the while, she didn't even have a nomination to begin with. Did Bette ever get her last hurrah? You'll have to keep watching to find out. Bette and Joan told the press in 1962 that there was no bad blood between them. Joan's 1963 snub, however, proved that they would always be rivals. Bette didn't let go of the anger even when Joan passed away in 1977. Reportedly, she once said that you should never talk bad about the dead, only good. She then went on to say, "Joan's dead. Good." This next tale of revenge features one of Hollywood's most famous stars.
Has the war started?
Number 9. Clark Gable vs. MGM. Stories of celebrities feuding with production houses are all too common. They'd also notoriously underpay their stars, even if that star was Clark Gable. Studios were known for blackmailing Hollywood actors. However, Gable was an established star. He realized that MGM was issuing and then reissuing Gone with the Wind, but not paying him for it. Gable tried to negotiate a higher salary, but MGM refused. If anything, they reneged on his existing salary conditions. Gable was grossly underpaid. Officially, MGM announced that they just didn't have that sort of money anymore. They had been working with several stars and refused to negotiate a pay raise. Ultimately, Gere Garson and Judy Garland refused to renew their contracts. Gable, on the other hand, was still under contract through 1957. MGM made sure to make him act in as many films as possible. Gable couldn't say no because he was under contract. Still, he hated every second of it. The last film he ever worked on for MGM was 1954's Betrayed. After that, he refused to renew his contract and said goodbye to MGM. Meanwhile, he'd been plotting his revenge. It's one for the ages. The studio was struggling. They needed reissues of Gone with the Wind to get by. For that, though, they also needed Gable's cooperation. He'd once tried to negotiate better terms with MGM, but was turned away. Now, Gable could have just said no outright, but that wouldn't have been any fun. Instead, Gable reportedly instructed his agents to entertain all talks with MGM. He wanted the talks to go on for months on end. However, he told his agents that at the end they had to say no. No matter what the pay raise was like, Gable wouldn't work with MGM anymore. This next rivalry started at birth between two famous Hollywood sisters.
I did not speak to her at my mother's memorial, and so it was the previous telephone call when she...
Number 8. Sibling rivalry in Hollywood. Did you know that Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine are the only sisters who've received Academy Awards in leading categories? You'd think that the two shared a special bond, but you'd be wrong. Where does the epic revenge tale come in? Wait for it, it's a shocking one. The sisters never eased up to one another. Olivia was already an actress when Joan was offered a contract. However, her mother told Joan that she couldn't use the family name. She believed that it would hurt Olivia's established reputation. Again, this was something Joan hated her for. Olivia had tried several times to mend her relationship with Joan. In 1942, the sisters were both nominated for Best Actress, Joan for Suspicion and Olivia for Hold Back the Dawn. Joan won that night, and Olivia was reportedly happy for her. She told everyone, "We've done it." However, Joan was less forthcoming. She ignored Olivia and went back to her table. Joan believed that it was all for the cameras. Was it? We might never know. We do know that Olivia got her revenge later on. Stay tuned. Olivia got her moment in the sun in 1947. That was when she won an Oscar for To Each His Own. This time, Joan was there to come up to her and shake her hand. Joan reportedly went up with her arm extended. She thought her sister would shake her hand and bury the hatchet. Olivia, however, looked her up and down and then went away. This was particularly embarrassing for Joan since several celebs witnessed the embarrassing encounter. By this point, Joan had already decided she wanted nothing more to do with her sister. She once told the press that it was possible to divorce your sister and that she wanted nothing more to do with her. Next up on this list is a famous duo who packed a powerful punch on stage. Offstage, though, they probably wanted to throw a few punches.
How about a cup of coffee? Maybe a piece of cheesecake.
Thanks. I'm pleased to hear things go well with you, Nathan, from communiques received in Las Vegas.
Number 7. Marlon Brando, Frank Sinatra, and a Slice of Cheesecake. The 1955 remake of the musical saw Brando in the leading role. This was something that irked Sinatra. He'd reportedly been gunning for that role and was disappointed when it was offered to Brando. Things turned animus on set, and Brando decided he needed to put Sinatra in his place. He did it in the most hilarious way possible. Stick around. Sinatra might have hated Brando, but he was committed to his role. Brando knew this. He also knew that Sinatra loathed cheesecake for some reason. Sinatra had tried to convince Joseph Mankiewicz, the director, to replace the cheesecake in his scene. This helped Brando pull off an iconic revenge, maybe even one of the most iconic revenges in Hollywood history. In the scene, Brando's Sky Masterson would be talking to Sinatra's Nathan Detroit. Sinatra had to sit and nod, eating his cheesecake while Brando talked. Brando made sure to execute the scene perfectly until the last line. Then he'd mess up the last few words on purpose. How many times do you think Brando pulled this off? Pour in those guesses. Brando made Sinatra redo the scene 8 times. In the end, Sinatra threw his plate on the ground and jammed his fork into the table. He yelled at everyone on set and asked, "How much cheesecake do you think I can eat?" Brando's revenge was hilarious, and Mankiewicz wasn't even mad at him for it. Sinatra had allegedly been a pain on set, and everyone needed the comic relief. Still, Brando came back on set the next day and executed the scene perfectly. This next tale of revenge is something that was a long time coming. It was a feud between a famous celebrity and a scathing publication, after all. Number 6. Bert Reynolds' feud with the press. Reynolds was known for performing all of his own stunts. He had quite a few injuries and scars from it, too. In 1984, Reynolds broke his jaw while filming City Heat. This was during the first day of filming when he was struck by a metal chair. Reynolds had to be rushed to the hospital for an indefinite stay. The story of his injury was nothing scandalous. The National Enquirer, however, wanted to turn it into something that would sell copies. So they came up with a tale that suggested that Reynolds had contracted AIDS. The publication reasoned that Reynolds' sudden exit from the set was because he couldn't function because of his disease anymore. Of course, the actor was less than thrilled when he heard the news. Most celebrities would file lawsuits and claims. Reynolds, however, had a whole different approach. He believed that publications always found some legal loopholes that helped them. The best thing for him to do was to fight fire with fire. What did Reynolds do? You'd be surprised. It's a first in Hollywood history. Later, during Christmas time, Reynolds claimed that he carried out his revenge. He hired a helicopter and a pilot. He then filled the helicopter with bags and bags of manure. Reynolds then traveled with the pilot over the National Enquirer's New York office. There he saw their giant Christmas tree and put his plan into action. The two dropped bags of manure onto the Christmas tree. By the time they were done, Reynolds claimed the tree was covered in brown goo. He actually wasn't sorry for what he did even years later. In fact, Reynolds reasoned it by saying that the Enquirer had been writing filth about him for years. Now, he'd just given them something to write about. This next revenge story is as devious as it is hilarious, and it's about Bill Murray.
You want a prediction about the weather? You're asking the wrong Phil. I'll give you a winter prediction.
Number 5. Bill Murray's deaf personal assistant. Groundhog Day is arguably Murray's most iconic film to date. It was also a mega-million-dollar production. This meant that everyone was working tirelessly to make sure it was a success. Murray was the lead, but he was hardly ever reachable. Every department needed Murray's go-ahead, but he'd never pick up his phone. When he did pick up, he'd always be in a bad mood. Eventually, the team told him to hire a personal assistant. This was so they could communicate directly with the assistant and leave Murray alone. Now, the star loved the idea, but he wanted them to go no contact with him. This meant hatching a devious plan. There's a reason why Murray wanted revenge, and it's gotten some mixed reviews. Here's what he did. He hired a personal assistant who was deaf and could only communicate via sign language. The catch was that Murray didn't know sign language. This meant that he could in no way communicate with his assistant. Also, the people calling him couldn't communicate with the personal assistant either. It was a loophole. Murray found a way to appease the studio and irk them at the same time. How did he get away with it for so long? Well, Murray told the studio that he was trying to learn sign language. This went on for 2 weeks. Murray only made a half-hearted attempt. This case of revenge was sensational but also controversial. A few people claimed that Murray had outdone himself. Others actually applauded him for outdoing himself. It all depends on perspective. This next revenge tale features a psychological trick that went on for months.
There it is. Okay. Yes.
Number 4. Revenge on the set of Carlito's Way. If you watch the movie, you can see Penelope Ann Miller's face shrink dramatically in every other scene. The cast and crew didn't know why she was so adamant about crash dieting. However, John Leguizamo knew exactly why. The truth came out in 2006 when the actor published his memoir. In it, he claimed that he was the one who asked the costume department to shrink Penelope's clothes. Why? Allegedly, she was a handful on set. She would berate everyone from her co-stars to the crew. She also acted as if John was invisible. The actor claimed that the only people Penelope would socialize with were people with greater influence than her. John actually called her a few choice words and alleged that she was acting elitist. This, of course, meant that everyone had a problem with her on set. It gave John the perfect idea for carrying out his revenge. And it'll shock you. The actor claimed that he plotted his revenge for months. It wasn't hard to get the costume department to agree. Again, everyone apparently hated Penelope. He claimed that he told the costume department to reduce the waist size in her costumes by an inch. He told them to do this for every new outfit of hers. Penelope reportedly panicked when she couldn't fit in her clothes. This led her to go on several diets over the course of production. Her rapid weight loss is apparent on screen. The people who weren't in on it were concerned. He even defended his revenge plot, claiming that she continued to be mean to everyone. John went as far as calling her evil. In 2017, though, on an episode of Live with Kelly and Ryan, the actor changed his story. He claimed that he made it up to sell his memoir. The costume head also claimed the story was false. However, if you watch Carlito's Way, it's obvious that Penelope was on a crash diet. Maybe he retracted his statements after receiving backlash. Who knows? Next up is a revenge tale between two stars who could have been best friends in another life.
Mr. Miller, Miss Jerry Jordan. I made up the Jerry Jordan myself.
Number 3. Marilyn Monroe hated Jane Mansfield. It's hard to imagine that the two leading ladies were feuding, mostly because they seemed like they could have been twins. If anything, that was exactly what they hated about each other. Marilyn Monroe was already a certified star when Jane Mansfield came onto the scene. In fact, many people believe that Jane got her big break in Hollywood by looking exactly like Marilyn. The Gentlemen Prefer Blonde star, however, hated the comparison. She once told the press that she was inches away from suing Jane. When asked on what grounds, Marilyn claimed for ruining her image. Of course, Jane didn't appreciate being constantly compared to Marilyn either. She also didn't like the fact that Hollywood was making her out to be a knockoff of the real thing. Jane's also remembered for the infamous photo with Sophia Loren. That picture pretty much sums up her entire career as a blonde bombshell. Interestingly, she was a natural brunette just like Marilyn. So what did Jane do when the Marilyn comparisons got too much? The perfect yet most controversial revenge in Hollywood history. Marilyn would throw shade at Jane whenever she could. She made sure that publications knew she was a B-grade version of herself. This irked Jane, and she decided to beat Monroe at her own game. Everyone remembers Marilyn's infamous presidential song to John F. Kennedy, right? That more or less confirmed any suspicion that the two had an affair. While it was damaging to her career, it was a sensational affair. Jane knew that she needed to show Marilyn she wasn't a knockoff version of her. She wanted to prove that she could get anything Marilyn had. So she chose the president. Allegedly, Jane enlisted the help of the president's brother-in-law to get her close to him. Then she started a brief but impactful affair with him. The news traveled back to Marilyn, and she was fuming. That was what Jane wanted, after all. She wanted to show Marilyn that she could do it, and she could do it better. The actress later went on to have a few acting credits to her name. However, her most prominent role in Hollywood, ironically, is still that of a blonde bombshell. So even though she irked Marilyn and exacted her revenge, things didn't change. Maybe it had something to do with her sudden death at the age of 34. That was another way in which she mimicked Monroe, who died just 5 years before her at age 36. Jane's death, however, was brought on by a terrible accident that cut her career short. This next sensational revenge tale inspired a Hollywood treasure.
Complete control of the government of this state. I made no campaign promises.
Number 2. The Tale Behind Citizen Caine. Today, we can all agree that the 1941 film Citizen Caine was based on tycoon William Hearst. However, it was a matter of great controversy back in the day. Orson Welles was a co-director and the leading man on the project. When news traveled back to Hearst that Citizen Caine was in the works, he was livid. He threatened to end Orson's career. What he didn't know back then was that the screenplay was inspired by revenge. The other man working on Citizen Caine was Herman Mankiewicz. He was once believed to have been a close personal friend of Hearst's. So much so, in fact, that Herman was a part of Hearst's inner circle. This meant that he knew all the deep and dark secrets that the tycoon wanted to keep private. Why did Herman want revenge on his good friend? You'll find out. Herman was actually once good friends with Charles Lederer. He was Hollywood actress Marion Davies' nephew. Through their friendship, Herman became acquainted with Hearst. Davies and Hearst had a long-standing affair. It was public knowledge. In fact, Hearst's family knew all about it. It was, however, an open secret in Hollywood, and Hearst made sure it never made its way into the press. It helped that Hearst was the CEO of a newspaper company and controlled what was published and what wasn't. Marion, on the other hand, didn't want publications to portray her as a mistress. She didn't like the idea of being typecast. Also, she didn't want people to think she cheated her way to the top. Marion was also a good 30 years younger than Hearst, which would have added to the controversy. Initially, Herman had no plans to expose Hearst. However, once he joined his inner circle, he saw Hearst as the monster that he was. Reportedly, Herman hated everything Hearst stood for. He hated the way he feigned ignorance on troubling matters and his elitist attitude. Herman wanted to stick it to Hearst, but he didn't know how. Then came Orson Welles, and Herman got his revenge. So, what did Herman do that rocked both Hearst and Hollywood? Stick around. Orson had been on Hearst's tracks for a while. He approached Herman in 1939 with the screenplay for a movie based on the newspaper tycoon. However, he needed Herman's help. Orson wanted to make the portrayal as accurate as possible. For that, he needed a member of his inner circle, and a bitter one at that. Herman agreed right away and burned bridges with Hearst. However, He initially denied that Citizen Caine had anything to do with Hearst. This didn't convince anyone, not even Hearst. He was fuming and made sure that Citizen Caine received as little publicity in the press as possible. Ironically, the audience sold out the show. Everyone loved Citizen Caine. It's even gone down in history as one of the best movies of all time. Of course, it ruined Hearst's reputation and also derailed Marion's career. Does the tale of revenge end there? No, there's still more to come. Herman's next act of vengeance was against none other than Orson. Apparently, he hated that the actor was getting all the credit. Orson was written in the press as being the sole mastermind behind Citizen Caine. Publications made it so Citizen Caine was understood to be a one-man show. This prompted Herman to reach out to the press and slander Orson. He went ahead and claimed that Orson had once offered him $10,000 to sign away his rights to the movie. He told this tale to anyone who'd listen. Orson clarified and claimed that nothing of the sort happened. He also alleged that Herman had cut off all contact with him for no reason. This last revenge tale features one of the most hated men in Hollywood.
And the stretcher bearer pouring some rum down my throat. Oh, you should have some of that rum.
You didn't have any, did you?
No, just a couple of drops, but I stopped for some refreshment on the way back, and I brought these.
Whoa.
Come on. Whoa, open them up.
Number 1. Errol Flynn, the most hated man in Hollywood. Errol Flynn had many admirers. He was, after all, one of the most successful actors of all time. He was also a coveted ladies' man and could charm his way out of any situation. However, there came a time when all of Hollywood allegedly hated him. The Australian actor was known to be a womanizer and a heavy drinker. It later came out that he was also a predator. Errol reportedly engaged with underage girls, and it was more or less of an open secret in the industry. This was back when everyone in Hollywood had something to hide. So, Errol went unnoticed with his secrets so long as he kept everyone else's. He met David Niven at a party, and the two hit it off immediately. Errol had reportedly played a prank on David. He'd led him to a room with a naked woman and embarrassed him in front of everyone else at the party. Still, the two had a laugh and went on to become good friends. Eventually, they decided to move in together. Their tale of revenge is a controversial one. It showcases the dark side of Hollywood. Stick around to find out more. David would later admit that he was drawn to Errol's world. He too enjoyed drinking and partying with Errol. David, however, asserted that he never touched an underage girl. That was something only Errol did. He, however, admitted that he never stopped him either. But there was one time when Errol crossed the line. David claimed that after shooting the Dawn Patrol in 1938, the two threw a party to celebrate. The party included several girls, drinks, and drugs. Later, when the girls had left, Errol got a little too comfortable with David. That was when he realized that Errol wanted more from their friendship. David claimed that he rejected and rebuked Errol, which irked him. The two got into a heated fight, and David moved out the next day. That sparked Errol's quest for revenge, and it was a devious plot. You'll be left shocked. David and Errol never collaborated after the incident. Errol, however, had been harboring a grudge for years. David was first married to Primula Susan Rollo in 1946. After her tragic death, he moved on with Hjordis Paulina Tersmaden in 1948. The British actor admitted that he was in a dark place after Primula's death. He claimed that he blamed himself for her death. He'd also not been faithful at the time of her death, and the guilt ate away at him. David once claimed that he tried to end his life in 1946. He was still in a dark and tragic place when he got married a second time. It was no secret that the two had their problems. Their problems, however, were exasperated by Errol's involvement. It was believed that he had a brief affair with Paulina simply out of spite. The affair strained their relationship further. When David died in 1983, he claimed that Primula was the only woman he'd ever loved. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out some of our other videos while you're here.